You know, in the high-stakes world of professional football, managers are usually judged by one thing: wins and losses. But what if their words, what if their actual language is just as important as the final score? Today, we're going to unpack a fascinating story of how one manager's choice of words, not just his team's performance, helped seal his fate at one of the biggest clubs in the world.
And this quote gets right to the very heart of it. It was said by a fan about the new manager of Manchester United, David Moyes. And it's such a powerful statement because it tells you that something was going wrong that had nothing to do with what was happening on the pitch. The problem wasn't just the results, it was what was being said. So, a little context for you. For 20 years, Sir Alex Ferguson had turned Manchester United into this global dynasty, a team synonymous with winning. His successor, David Moyes, stepped into what was, arguably the toughest job in the entire sport. The pressure was just immense. And after only 10 months, it was over. Yeah, the results were poor, but the fan backlash, it was about something deeper.
So here's our game plan for digging into this. We're going to start with the mystery itself, then look at the academic study that put it all under a microscope. We'll lay out the linguistic evidence they found piece by piece, and then decode what it all means for leadership, for identity, and really for the incredible power of our words. All right, Section 1, the Moyes mystery. Because while the team was struggling on the field, a whole other drama was playing out in every single press conference and post-match interview. And that drama, as it turns out, was just as important. So this is the core question, right? Why did fans who, let's be honest, were used to the occasional bad result, why did they react with so much frustration to the way their new manager talked? What was it about his words that hit such a nerve? That's what we're here to figure out. Which brings us to Section 2, a manager's words. And to get to the bottom of this, we're actually going to turn to an academic investigation. Yep, a deep dive study published in the Journal of Pragmatics that put the manager's language under a microscope. And their method was so simple, but just brilliant. Researchers went out and they collected and transcribed 28 different TV interviews that happened right after a loss. See, they weren't interested in the wins. They wanted to see how these leaders handled the tough moments, because that's when your real communication style comes out. Now, here's the crucial part. They didn't just look at Moyes by himself. They compared his interviews directly against those of the guys who came right before him, the legend, Sir Alex Ferguson, and his right-hand man, Michael Phelan. And this comparison, well, this is where the story gets really, really interesting. Okay, Section 3, the linguistic showdown. This is where the researchers uncovered these 4 really consistent, really telling differences in how Moyes and the old guard spoke after a defeat. First up, how they talked about the other team. After losing to a huge rival, David Moyes would often praise them, talk about how good they were. His predecessors, Ferguson and Phelan, almost never. They might say something nice about a smaller team that pulled off an upset, but after losing to a direct competitor, nope, they pointedly avoided giving them any credit. Difference number 2, how they critiqued their own team. After a tough loss, Moyes would often try to find some positives, and even when he was critical, he'd use pretty mild words, like poor. Ferguson? Oh, he was famously harsh. He'd use these incredibly strong words like suicidal to describe a mistake, or call a defeat horrible and embarrassing. The difference in intensity there is just night and day. Third, talking about the club's identity. Ferguson and Phelan were constantly talking about the high standards of Manchester United. They'd explicitly say things that we should have done better, which just reinforces this idea that losing is completely unacceptable here. Moyes, in the interviews they looked at, almost never brought that up. And fourth, and this is a big one, how they projected confidence. When asked about bouncing back, Moyes would often use really cautious language. He'd say things like, "We'll try to improve." His predecessors? Way more assertive. They used words that projected absolute certainty, like, "We will recover," or "There is no doubt we will respond." It's the difference between hope and a declaration. So let's move to Section 4, decoding the differences. We've got these 4 linguistic patterns. On their own, maybe they seem kind of small, but when you put them all together, they paint an incredibly clear picture. And this chart just lays it out perfectly. Look at the divide. On every single key communication point after a loss, Moyes' language was projecting caution and deference, while his predecessor's language projected dominance and certainty. One style says, "We hope," and the other one says, "We demand." So that brings us to Section 5, identity versus reality.
Why did this linguistic split matter so much? Well, to really get it, we need to talk about this idea called impression management.
Impression management, it sounds complicated, but it's something we all do all the time. It's how we use our words, our body language, everything, to kind of shape how people see us, whether it's in a job interview or, a press conference. We're all constantly performing an identity. And in this case, the identity of Manchester United manager was a very, very specific one. See, the club didn't just have a winning history. The study calls it a historical narrative. For 2 decades under Ferguson, the club's public identity was one of absolute strength, total dominance, and this relentless expectation that they would win. This was the role. This was the character that Moyes was expected to step into and play. But his words didn't match the character. His praise for rivals, his mild criticism of his own team, that cautious outlook, it all came together to project an identity that was careful, respectful, almost small.
And that was in direct conflict with the identity everyone knew, the language of Ferguson and Phelan, their refusal to praise rivals, their brutal self-criticism, their confident declarations. It was a constant performance of strength and dominance. They spoke like they were in charge, like winning was just the natural order of things. And right here, this is the critical clash. There was this huge disconnect between the identity Moyes was projecting and the one the fans expected to see. What he was saying and what they were hearing were two totally different things. His caution wasn't heard as being realistic. It was heard as a lack of confidence. His weaker criticism wasn't seen as supportive. It was seen as a lack of strength. And his praise for rivals, that wasn't sportsmanship. It was heard as an admission that Manchester United wasn't the top dog anymore.
All right, let's bring it home. Our final section, the final whistle. What's the big takeaway from all of this?
Look, at the end of the day, this is not just a football story. It is a powerful lesson in communication for any leader in any field. Your words aren't just a passive commentary on what's happening. They are an active force. They build your identity, they set expectations, and they literally shape the reality that your team, your customers, your whole audience experiences. Moyes' words didn't fit the identity of the role he was in, and that created a reality where his leadership was constantly being questioned.
And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Whether you're a manager of a football club, a team leader at work, or just navigating your own career, the language you use is constantly, day in and day out, building an identity. So the question to ask yourself is this: what identity are your words building for you?